All right, so today we're going deep on winter trout fishing, specifically at Maramec Spring Park in Missouri. Most people think of Maramec Spring Park as, a beautiful place to visit. But we're going to go beyond that today and talk about how to actually catch some fish when it's cold out there. So we've got a recent blog post about a fishing trip, we've got all the details about the park, and we've even got some recent news that might affect your trip.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting here is that we're not just looking at the what of fishing at Maramec, but we're going to try to dig into the why behind some of these winter techniques.
Absolutely. So, first let's just paint a picture of the park for anyone who hasn't been there.
Yeah, Maramec Spring Park is just beautiful. It's home to the fifth largest spring in Missouri. And that spring pumps out a ridiculous amount of water every day, like 100 million gallons daily.
Yeah, that's wild. And that constant flow of water is key for winter fishing because that spring water stays around 50 degrees Fahrenheit all year round.
Yeah, it creates like a unique microclimate in the river, in the Maramec River, which flows through the park.
So even when the air temperature is freezing, the water itself is relatively warm.
And that means the trout are more active. More active and hopefully more willing to bite.
Which is what we want.
Exactly.
So, we'll get to the actual tactics in a bit. But first, why don't we just touch on, what the park is actually like?
Sure. Yeah. It's more than just fishing. Maramec Spring Park is over 1,800 acres of forest and fields. They've got a cafe, a store, even camping available.
Yeah, it's a great place to just get away and escape the city. You can spend the day fishing, then relax by a campfire under the stars.
Yeah, sounds nice.
All right, but let's get back to the fishing. Like we said, and we found this blog post from Shaka OG and Shaka Jr. They went fishing at Maramec during a recent cold snap, like 20 degrees out there.
Wow, dedicated.
They were fishing during the catch and release season, which runs from November to the end of February. And they were catching fish, but what I found really interesting was what they were catching them on.
Yeah, they specifically mentioned two lures that were working well. The Rapala Original Floater SO5,
Yeah.
balsa minnow in the brown trout color, and the Trout Magnet 2.5 carat crank, also in brown trout.
Okay, so let's break down the Rapala first. It's a classic lure, but why do you think it works so well for them in winter conditions?
Well, the Rapala is known for its lifelike wounded minnow action. And, in cold water, trout become a little more lethargic, less willing to chase fast-moving prey. A slow, struggling minnow like the Rapala imitates becomes a much easier target.
So it's playing on their instincts. The trout want to conserve energy in the cold, so they're looking for an easy meal. And we talked about how the Maramec River is spring-fed,
Yeah.
which makes it exceptionally clear.
Yeah, that's key. That clarity is crucial. The trout have a clear view of the Rapala, and they can really see those enticing movements.
All right, so what about the other lure, the Trout Magnet Crank? What makes that one stand out?
So the Trout Magnet Crank, this one's all about triggering a reaction strike. It excels in what we call a jerkbait action. Basically, you're giving it short, sharp tugs as you reel it in. So it's creating this erratic darting movement that mimics a fleeing bait fish. And that sudden movement triggers those predatory instincts, even in cold water.
So you're teasing them a little bit, making them think they're about to miss out on a meal. And I bet those rattles on the trout magnet further enhance that appeal.
Absolutely. It's a multi-sensory assault that the trout can't resist, especially in that clear water.
So we've talked about these lures, but there's also some important news for anyone planning a trip to Maramec this winter.
Yeah, this is big. There's been a lot of heavy rainfall lately, and that's caused some flood damage at the park, so there's a delay in the opening for the winter catch and release season.
So double check the park's status before you head out.
Yeah, always good to stay informed. Weather can change so quickly, and, park conditions can be affected.
But don't worry, the season will start as soon as the park reopens. And once it does, the park hours will be from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So just plan your fishing trip accordingly.
Absolutely. So before we move on to some more specific techniques, I just want to pause for a second. What's standing out to you so far about what we've discussed?
Well, you know what I'm really seeing is how the small details matter so much. Like the water temperature, the clarity, all of that plays a huge role in what lures to use and how to fish.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we'll keep unpacking as we delve deeper into winter trout fishing at Maramec.
It really shows that you can't just throw any old lure out there and expect to catch fish, especially in the winter.
Nope, not at all.
Yeah.
You really got to think about, how that colder water and that clear water affects how the trout behave.
Right. So let's go back to those two lures for a minute, the Rapala and the Trout Magnet. Besides that, wounded minnow action, are there any other specific retrieval techniques that make the Rapala even more effective?
Oh, yeah, for sure. One technique that works really well in winter is the slow twitch and pause. So instead of just reeling it in steadily, you want to give the Rapala these short, subtle twitches and then pause. Well, they just suspend there in the water.
So it looks like it's struggling to stay afloat.
Exactly. And that can be deadly effective,
Yeah.
especially for those lethargic trout.
Oh, yeah, they're not going to be chasing after anything too fast.
Uh,
So it's almost like you're playing a game with them.
It is. It's all about enticing them, making it look as natural as possible. And another thing to keep in mind with the Rapala is that it's a floating lure. So you can actually adjust the depth by how fast you reel and the position of your rod tip.
Oh, that's cool. So you can target different depths where the trout might be hanging out.
Exactly.
All right, so let's talk about the trout magnet crank now and that jerk bait action. Can you explain that a little more for those of us who might not be familiar with that technique?
Yeah, sure. So basically with jerkbait fishing, you're giving the lure these short, sharp tugs with your rod tip while you're reeling in the slack line.
So it's like a sudden, unpredictable movement.
Exactly. And that triggers a reaction strike from the trout.
Even if they're not actively feeding?
Even if they're not hungry, they'll still hit it.
It's like a surprise attack.
Exactly. And the trout magnet crank is perfect for this. It's got that long, slender body and a tight wiggle, plus those rattles we talked about. It all adds up to a pretty irresistible package.
Especially in that clear water. Now, you mentioned earlier that trout become more lethargic in cold water. So does that mean we should always use slow-moving lures in the winter?
Well, that's a great question. And it's not quite that simple. While slow presentations are often more effective, there are times when you might want to mix things up.
Oh, really? When would you do that?
Well, if you're fishing in an area where the water is a little warmer, like near a spring inflow, the trout might be more active and willing to chase a faster lure.
Okay, so it's really about paying attention to the conditions.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to winter trout fishing.
So you got to be adaptable.
Absolutely. It's all about observation experimentation and, figuring out what works best on that particular day.
Right. Speaking of adapting, let's go back to that news about the delayed opening at Maramec. How do you think that's going to affect fishing once the park reopens?
Well, those floodwaters are definitely going to have an impact on the river. It could change the clarity and the flow patterns.
So everything we've been talking about could be totally different.
Yeah, potentially. Anglers are going to need to be ready to adjust. It might mean using different lures, fishing different areas of the river, or, changing up their retrieval techniques.
So adaptability is key.
Absolutely. This is where experience and knowledge really come into play.
So for someone like me, who's relatively new to winter trout fishing, what are some things I can do to prepare?
Well, first I would recommend doing some research. Look at maps, read fishing reports. Try to get a sense of the different areas of the river.
Okay, so do my homework before I even get there.
Exactly. The more you know about the river, the better decisions you'll be able to make when you're actually out there.
That makes sense. Anything else?
And don't be afraid to experiment. Try different lures, different retrieve, see what works.
So it's all part of the learning process.
Exactly. Every fishing trip is a chance to learn something new.
All right, so we've covered a lot. Lure selection, retrieval techniques, adapting to conditions. What other factors should we consider when it comes to winter trout fishing at Maramec?
One thing that's often overlooked is stealth.
Stealth? What do you mean by that?
Well, in the winter, trout tend to be more spooky, especially in that clear water.
So like any sudden movements could scare them off.
Exactly. So you want to approach the water carefully, avoid making loud noises, and try to blend in with your surroundings.
So it's like we're playing hide and seek with the trout.
In a way, yeah. You want to be as inconspicuous as possible.
Okay, that makes sense. Now thinking back to that blog post, do you think their success had anything to do with stealth?
Hard to say for sure, but it's definitely possible. They were fishing in really cold conditions, which means the trout were probably holding in deeper, slower water.
And in that kind of environment, stealth would be even more important.
Absolutely. Any loud noise or sudden movement could easily spook them.
So it seems like stealth is just as important as lure selection and retrieval techniques.
It is. It's all part of the equation.
All right, so we've talked about a lot here. The unique conditions at Maramec, how trout behave in the winter, and, specific lures and techniques.
And how important it is to be adaptable, especially with that delayed opening.
Right, you got to be prepared to adjust on the fly.
Exactly. So I think it's time to address the big question.
You mean, is winter really the best time to fish at Maramec?
That's the one.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, warmer water clearer conditions and way fewer people on the river, it does seem like winter could be the best time to fish at Maramec.
Yeah, definitely makes a strong case. Fewer crowds means less pressure on the fish and a more peaceful experience for you. Plus, like we talked about, winter trout are often a bit more predictable. They tend to hold in those deeper, slower pools.
So it might be cold out there, but it sounds like you get a more focused fishing experience.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's not just about luck. Winter trout fishing requires a more, strategic approach.
It's like solving a puzzle.
Exactly. And when you do hook one, it feels even more rewarding.
Plus, you can't beat the scenery. Being out on the river on a crisp winter day.
It's beautiful.
So for anyone who's maybe never considered winter fishing, I say give it a try.
Yeah, Maramec is a great place to start.
Bundle up, grab your gear, and embrace the challenge.
You might just find that winter is your new favorite time to fish.
We've given you all the info you need. Now it's time to get out there and put it to the test. Let us know how you do. We might even feature your winter trout fishing tales in a future episode. Until then, tight lines and happy fishing.